So we're going to be reading Seminar 1. Jacques Lacan taught his famous seminar from 1953 to 1980. So that's about 28 years. And each year he focused on a specific theme. So in Seminar 1, that is the one we are starting with today, it's about Freud's technical writings. There are other seminars, like then there's a seminar about the ego, then there is psychosis, desire, ethics, anxiety, well, many other topics. But in this seminar, not only in Seminar 1, in all seminars in general, Lacan didn't use a fully written script. So he was developing arguments in real time. Frequently, he would revise what he just said, contradicting himself, refining previous positions. So it was not a conventional lecture course. It was more like an open conversation laboratory where he was reformulating psychoanalytic ideas in dialogue with Freud, also with other schools of psychoanalysis, for example, Melanie Klein, other ideas in psychology, structural linguistics, philosophy, logic, mathematics, literature, topology. He used diagrams a lot. He called some of them mathemes. There were like topological figures, all kind of like graphics and diagrams to represent the ideas, right? To try to formalize these ideas, to make them visual. And he combined his theoretical ideas with clinical vignettes. He would go back to Freud's texts, like focus on some concept, do some philosophical commentary in the middle, and then invent a new concept, a new idea. So this is like for you to get more or less like the flavor of what was going on there. And also another interesting ingredient is who was attending the seminar, because it was a very diverse group of people. We can mention people like Michel Foucault, who attended at the beginning in the 50s, then Louis Althusser, Jacques Derrida, Julia Kristeva, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Roland Barthes. Like these are like important, right? Heavyweight 20th century thinkers. These are people who were at the time, or some of them became later, like top thinkers for France and for the world. And also like a mix, like psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, philosophers, linguists, mathematicians, writers. So the seminar, Lacan seminar, became like a central intellectual event. It was an event that you needed to be there in France, in Paris. They were transcribed, the seminars. There were recordings and notes. Many were edited and published after Lacan's death. And they are like the best way to understand Lacan, because they are much more systematic and much clearer than his essays. The essays are collected in the 2 volumes of the Écrits, the writings. Right? They're much more complicated. So this is more accessible. So we will read Seminar 1. The topic is Freud's technical writings. This seminar took place between 1953 and 54. But even though this is Seminar 1, this is not the beginning for Lacan. He's 53 years old when he begins this seminar. He was born in 1901. So he's already a mature thinker. He's already a famous psychoanalyst. And this slide that you're looking at is some of his main publications up to this point. So among them, you can see, for example, his paper on the mirror stage, which is quite famous. So the point here is that we're not reading Lacan from the beginning, even though we're starting with Seminar 1. Right? He's already been developing his take on psychoanalysis for 20 years. Now, if he was, in fact, then writing and teaching before 1953, why do we start counting the seminars from 1953, right? Why is this Seminar 1? Actually, when you read it, you'll see that he makes references to what I taught last year or 2 years ago, right? So what happened in 1953 was a great split in French psychoanalysis. What happened was that Lacan and several colleagues resigned from the official Psychoanalytic Association. I will say a few words in French. I don't speak French, so you have to bear with me, right? Literally, excuse my French. Société Psychoanalytique de Paris. So there were many political and ideological disagreements, as well as disagreement over how to train new psychoanalysts. And Lacan and some colleagues founded the Société Française de Psychanalyse. So Seminar 1 is numbered 1 because it inaugurates the formal annual cycle that began after the foundation of the Société Française de Psychanalyse. The numbering, therefore, has like a symbolic value also, marks the beginning of a new period in Lacan's professional life. This is also a period that is often described as Lacan's return to Freud. So the idea for Lacan is that mainstream psychoanalysis was losing Freud's spirit, the core of Freud's teaching. And so he was advocating a return to Freud. And this will be a very important point when we are reading his seminars. Seminar 1, the book that I share with you, starts with an introduction, an overture. And I will read today some fragments for the overture. It's only 3 pages, and I will be commenting on them. So not all of it, some fragments, some parts of this, 3 pages. And this is the first sentence in the book. And I put the original French in this slide because a minor issue with translation. And maybe if there are any, I don't know if there are any native French speakers or fluent French speakers, perhaps they can help us. But the English version reads, "The master breaks the silence with anything, with a sarcastic remark, with a kickstart." Now, the French is un coup de pied, which is not a kickstart. It's a kick, right? So the French, or the Spanish version that I use, suggests that the master may even like kick someone. So the English translation, a kickstart, it's like softens it, like tones down the violence of the original. The idea here is, I don't know, like in English, maybe you say kicking some butt, right? Sometimes it's necessary to create some new meaning. I continue with the text. So what you have on the slide is the text of the English version. That is how a Buddhist master conducts his search for meaning, according to the technique of Zen. It behoves the students to find out for themselves the answer to their own questions. The master does not teach ex cathedra a ready-made science. He supplies an answer when the students are on the verge of finding it. So Lacan starts Seminar 1 with a reference to Zen, which is a little bit rare. So he had mainly a background in Western philosophy, but he also showed sometimes interest in certain strands of Eastern thought, especially Zen Buddhism. So we have just read that the master is not in charge of providing ready-made meanings. And this applies both to the psychoanalytic process for Lacan and also to the teaching of psychoanalysis in specialized institutions. In both cases, the role of the master, let's say, the one in charge, the teacher, the psychoanalyst, is not to provide the final answer, but to produce an act, a kick, a sarcasm that can cut the ongoing discourse, disrupt the prior equilibrium, and create conditions for new signification. This kind of teaching is a refusal of any system. It uncovers a thought in motion, nonetheless vulnerable to systematization, since it necessarily possesses a dogmatic aspect. Freud's thought is the most perennially open to revision. It is a mistake to reduce it to a collection of hackneyed phrases. Each of his ideas possesses a vitality of its own. That is precisely what one calls the dialectic. So what Lacan is saying here, this kind of teaching is a refusal of any system, does not mean that psychoanalytic theory lacks structure. What he means is a refusal of closure. Why is it not a system? Because a system ends up in totalization, in a stable, fixed architecture of concepts. Lacan is saying that to teach or to study psychoanalysis, one needs to treat it not as something dead, static, but as something alive, changing in motion. He admits, however, that psychoanalysis is vulnerable to systematization. So this is unavoidable, right? Concepts relate to each other, theories connect to each other. There is coherence, and this coherence creates like the temptation of dogma. So the more systematic the thought, the easier it becomes to crystallize it in a rigid shape, right? And Lacan says, Freud thought is the most perennially open to revision. So this is actually the attitude Freud himself has towards his own writings. Freud's theories and concepts, there are many concepts that are famous, even part of pop culture, like drive, repression, narcissism, the ego, repetition, the unconscious. These concepts keep evolving in Freud from text to text. He reworks them repeatedly because he's trying to make sense of clinical material. So Lacan says it is a mistake to reduce it to a collection of hackneyed phrases. And actually this can happen also with CBT, right? And with other theories, that this becomes a cliche. Concepts circulate socially, they congeal into slogans. Like people say today things like, don't repress yourself, or that's your unresolved Oedipus complex, right? So what was once a conceptual invention becomes a cliche. And the dialectic is a dialectic between concepts. Like there has to be tension, contradiction, revision, displacement. And the truth for Lacan emerges in this movement, not in a final synthesis. So this is the point, basically, that he's here to offer a teaching that tries to be anti-systematic and open to revision. This is some other fragment from these 3 pages. They are incredibly dense. There's a lot of ideas there, right? So Lacan says, with the interpretation of dreams, something of a different essence, of a concrete psychological density is reintroduced, namely meaning. From the scientist point of view, Freud appeared at this point to revert to the most archaic thinking, reading something in dreams. He later returns to causal explanations. So Lacan here is referring to Freud's foundational book, The Interpretation of Dreams, the Traumdeutung. Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900. And this is the book that is usually considered to found, like this is the book, the foundational book, the book that founded psychoanalysis, right? Prior to Freud, there were like 2 ways of treating dreams, 2 attitudes toward dreams. There was the folk attitude, which is dreams have meaning. For example, dreams can predict the future. We were talking about the Bible, right? When the Pharaoh of Egypt dreams of 7 starving cows, this means that 7 years of drought will come, right? This is like the famous Pharaoh dream in the Old Testament. I don't know if it is the same in other countries, but in Argentina, there is a whole system when if you drink with a drunk man, it means you should choose number 14 to play in the lottery. Or if you dream with a pretty girl, it's number 15. And like there are like 100 different options. Dream themes to numbers you have to gamble on. So before Freud, there was the folk attitude towards dreams, and there was also the scientific attitude. And according to the scientific point of view, dreams are meaningless. They are random, they reflect some somatic change or some contextual disturbance. The idea is that for objective, experimental, modern science, like this attitude does not get along well with meaning. Scientific explanation usually reduces psychological phenomena to a different level in which you have causes and effects, and meaning is basically explained away. In Freud's time, this meant appealing to physical forces, like the theories about dreams from his time talked about attraction and repulsion and some kind of mechanistic processes to explain dreams. And today we would speak of neurons firings, neurotransmitters, neural pathways, neural networks, etc., and causal level of explanation. Which side does Freud take? Freud has like some ambivalence here. He wants to do science and he wants to be recognized as a scientist. And he was actually interested in neurons that had been only recently discovered in his time. But in his approach to dreams, he's closer to the folk explanation because he opts for finding meaning in dreams. Thus, Lacan says, from the scientific point of view, Freud appeared at this point to revert to the most archaic thinking, reading something in dreams, the folk explanation, the original explanation, right? Rather than the scientific one. Lacan also says that when one interprets a dream, one is always up to one's neck in meaning. What is at issue is the subjectivity of the subject in his desires, in his relation to his environment, to others, to life itself. So our task here is to reintroduce the register of meaning, a register that must itself be reintegrated on its own level. This is a matter of experience, right? This is what happens in clinical experience. If you work with dreams, you're working with meanings, you're working with interpretations. Working with clients to decipher the meaning of dreams is like one of my favorite things to do, right? When one works with dream material, one is, as Lacan says, up to one's neck in meaning, subjectivity, and desire. He adds something else to this mix. Freud dared to attach importance to what was happening to him, to the antinomies of his childhood, to his neurotic problems, to his dreams. That is why Freud is for us all a man beset, like anyone else is, by all the contingencies: death, woman, father. This represents a return to origins and barely warrants being called science, right? So Lacan is saying, did Freud make the option for objective, causalistic science? No, he opted for meaning. He went back to origins. This is the origins of humanity and our origins in each of us, in our lives, right? We start by understanding the world through language, through images, through meaning, through stories. So he goes back to origins. And also, Freud attaches importance to what is happening to him. And the audacity here is granting epistemic value to subjective experience. Freud does not treat his dreams, his symptoms, his confused, blurred memories, even his jokes as noise to be eliminated. He takes them as material. He self-analyzes, right? In objective science, the subject must be eliminated or neutralized. You don't want the subject to contaminate an observation with his mood or his desires, right? This has to be eliminated. Why? Because you need to secure objective observation, objective experimentation, objective theory. But in psychoanalysis, by contrast, the researcher as subject becomes implicated in the very field he or she is investigating. She cannot be extracted from this. And what is this subject experiencing? What does she carry with her? Childhood conflicts, neurotic problems, dreams. So Freud is a man beset by all the contingencies, as we all are, right? Beset by death, woman, father, he says. So Freud is therefore exposed to the same challenges as any subject: mortality, sexual difference, paternal authority. These are organizing signifiers of human experience. Freud's authority derives precisely from fully owning this subjective experience, not from neutralizing it. He reintroduces into knowledge what modern science had bracketed, which is the subject. Right? So Freud's procedure does not conform to this model of impersonal objectivity characteristic of natural sciences. This is, of course, Lacan's take. Someone could not agree with this, but this is Lacan's position, that Freud is operating from within his own subjective experience. Now, if it's not a science, um, what is psychoanalysis? And also having fun here, right? There's a little bit of irony. Next paragraph, he said psychoanalysis is not a science in this sense. What does he says? What holds good in the art of the expert cook who knows how to joint a bird, to disjoint it with as little resistance as possible, is also true for psychoanalysis. We do our dissecting with concepts, not with a knife. Every science remains in darkness for a long time, entangled in language. Lacan is saying that psychoanalysis is closer to the art of the cook than to objective natural science. Cooking is a practical art. To cut a chicken properly, you cut it at the joints. You follow the articulation that is already there. You know where the joints are, and so the cut is done without resistance. In the realm of theory, the knife is a concept, right? So concepts are what allow us to make distinctions, to separate, to articulate. But at the beginning, he's saying those concepts are still crude. They do not yet correspond to the articulations of the analytic experience. And he says actually this happens to all sciences, not only to psychoanalysis. So a science remains in darkness for a long time, entangled in language, and psychoanalysis is no exception. It operates within language from the beginning, and it must clarify its own terms before it can function. The development of psychoanalytic theory then resembles the experience of analysis itself, because it's the same, right? When someone starts talking about what's wrong in his or her life, the symptoms, likewise, for Lacan, result from being caught in language. They arise from the way the subject is inscribed in language, from the specific articulations and misarticulations of what he calls the signifier. We will come back to this in the future. Another fragment from these 3 pages. Let us now turn to the notion of the subject. When one brings it in, one brings in oneself. The man speaking to you is a man like any other. He makes use of the wrong language. Oneself is then at issue. What the heck is he saying here, right? He's insisting that the subject is not something located out there in the external world. It's not a specimen brought into the consulting room to be examined. It's not simply the individual who arrives and rings the bell at 4 p.m. for a session. The subject is oneself, too. This person who came to see me at 4 p.m. maybe started talking about how jealous he feels every time his beautiful girlfriend goes out to have drinks with her friends. And I can only listen to his jealousy with my own jealousy. I can only make sense of his words with my own words. I hear it through my own position in language. I can only subjectivize his discourse if I am myself a subject. So oneself is then at issue. Means that when I speak about my client, a subject, I become myself a subject. The concept of the subject turns back on the speaker. So when Lacan adds, the man speaking to you is a man like any other, he makes use of the wrong language. He points to the structural inadequacy of language itself. Language cannot capture it all in a perfect way. There is no meta-language, he says, no exterior formal like vantage point from which the subject could be cleanly defined. We start by speaking with the wrong knives, right, the wrong concepts, and we can only make progress in a psychoanalysis by analyzing oneself. This is why the analyst needs to have his or her own analysis, because it's implicated as a subject. The growing importance attributed today to countertransference means that it is a recognized fact that in analysis, the patient is not alone. There are 2 of us, and not only 2. So Sigmund Freud introduced the concept of countertransference in 1910. 1953, when Jacques Lacan opens his seminar, countertransference is like a central issue. That this is like one of the issues being more hotly debated in international psychoanalysis at that time. And Lacan says that the growing importance attributed to countertransference shows that the patient is not alone. So he's acknowledging that there is a shift in this debate. Analysis is no longer conceived as a one-sided deciphering of the patient by a neutral observer. The analyst unconscious is structurally also implicated. But when he adds, there are two of us, and not only two, he's even radicalizing this stance. The analytic situation cannot be reduced to two empirical individuals. It includes other elements that Lacan will spell out: the symbolic order, the function of the other with a capital O, the entire network of signifiers in which both analyst and analysand are caught. Phenomenologically, so to simplify in this context, phenomenologically, we just take it as at face value. If we look at it, right, the situation is a structure. That is to say that it is only through that that certain phenomena are isolable, separable. It is another structure, that of subjectivity, which gives human beings the idea that they are comprehensible to themselves. So this starts being more and more challenging, right? But if we slow down, he's distinguishing here two structures, right? The structure of the analytic situation versus the structure of subjectivity. The analytic situation, he's saying, it's not like a random encounter between two individuals. There are positions, there are rules, there are functions. You have an analyst, an analysand or client, speech, silence, transference, the place of the other, right? And only within this structured setting, certain phenomena become isolable, like slips of tongue, repetitions, formations of the unconscious. And second, there is another substructure, which is subjectivity itself. And subjectivity gives human beings the illusion that they are transparent to themselves, that they can understand their own motives, they know how they think, they know their own intentions. And this feeling of self-comprehension is itself an effect of a structure, of a linguistic structure. It has to do with the way the subject is constituted in language for Lacan. So the analytic structure exposes the limits of the subjective structure, right? When an analyst, when the subject brings a dream or has a slip of tongue, and then this becomes material, and then he works with it, on it, together with the analyst, and a different meaning emerges. The analytic structure is exposing the limits of the subjective structure that sustains self-understanding. So what appeared to be immediately comprehensible to the ego becomes, within analysis, something to be questioned and something to be rearticulated. So he says that being neurotic can help one become a good psychoanalyst. And at the beginning, it helped Freud. So he's saying, for Sigmund Freud, neurosis was not merely an object of study, but a lived experience. His self-analysis and his own symptoms were central to the discovery of the unconscious. For Jacques Lacan, what qualifies an analyst, like how can I identify what a good analyst is? It's not neurosis as such, but having been neurotic and having undergone analysis. So neurosis may lead one into analysis, and then the analytic work transforms one's relation to one's symptoms, to one's desires, in the context of transference. What have we learned today? I would say we haven't learned anything substantial, right? Nothing substantial. You will not be able to say to your friends, oh, today I learned this content, right? Because precisely this has to do with the non-systematic way in which we are starting our discussion, right? We have discussed the role of the master, the refusal of the closed system, the centrality of meaning, Freud's decision to take subjective experience seriously. We have highlighted that psychoanalysis operates within language. that the client and the analyst are structurally implicated in the analytic situation, that analysis is not an objective science, but a practice grounded in the speaking subject, right? But the most important thing for me is that we are trying to make the experience of reading Lacan. We're taking these paragraphs and trying to make sense of them. So these are only 3 pages. The Overture in Seminar 1, they're not the hardest one by far, right? And this is what we're trying to do, trying to make sense of them. Now, for our next meeting, we will have about 18 pages to read, and good luck with that, right? So don't fall into despair, read them, highlight the enigmatic sentences, and we'll work on them, right? So the picture there is of an Argentinian writer called Alejandro Dolina, who he in a radio show once he said, reading is deeply tiring for me. It's a very demanding activity. And if you look at someone reading Nietzsche or Dostoevsky or whatever author, these people don't look happy, the readers, right? They maybe they don't really want to read. They want to have read. It is gratifying to be asked, have you read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables? And to say, yes, I have read it, right? But like spending a couple of months reading until midnight, that's different. We become restless. We start like counting how many pages are left in the book, right? Oh, I still have 500 pages ahead, right? So he proposes, this guy, a thought experiment, which is a pill that contains all the information in a book. So you swallow the War and Peace pill, and it is as if you have read the whole book, right? You know every character, every event, every detail. You cannot distinguish someone who actually read the book from actually who took the pill. But what the pill cannot give you is the experience of struggling through the book, of moving sentence by sentence, getting lost, finding your way again, right? And this is the experience we will undertake here, not to acquire info, not to absorb content, not to arrive at the system, but to try to read Lacan. And that experience, Lacan wants also that this experience of reading the seminars is a little bit like being an analyst or being in analysis, right? And I would say being a psychotherapist in general, because it's the same idea of trying to read into the client's discourse, into the actions, into the narrative, and trying to make sense. And this is a tiresome process sometimes, right? So this is the invitation he's making us to read his seminars and to reread Freud, find different meanings there. One last reference. This guy here is Gregory Bateson. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He was a British anthropologist, epistemologist. He lived in a completely different intellectual world as compared to Lacan. I don't think they knew each other. He was a Palo Alto, California researcher. And he recounts the case of a schizophrenic patient who was institutionalized, who refused to eat. He was facing forced feeding. And this patient would claim, and this is, I'm going to say literally, so this is about how hard it is to read. Literally, this schizophrenic patient would say, I am an end table made of manzanita wood, which for us doesn't make sense, right? What did Bateson do with this patient? He altered the context. He invited this patient to have lunch with him at a restaurant. So he took him out of the psychiatric institution. So they go to a restaurant. Bateson orders ham and eggs. And then the patient says, I also want ham and eggs and toast. So the order arrives. The patient, like the Bateson's order also comes with a toast. The patient points at Bateson's toast and says, I want to eat that. Bateson says, okay, go ahead, eat it. So the patient ends up eating Bateson's toast, ham, an egg, everything that was on his plate, and then after that, his own plate, right? And then when he's satisfied, they order coffee, he reclines, and the patient reflects. Man's an eater. If the circumstances are resolved, I would. So you see, Manzanita would becomes Manzanita becomes Manzan eater. And the would becomes I would. But Bateson was able to understand this sentence by changing the context, right? By taking him out of the institution when he was already like, it was a fixed script, right? Something that the patient was repeating and nobody could listen to him. And in the oppression of the institution, he was refusing to it. But when the situation changed, when circumstances are resolved, he would eat, right? So from a Lacanian, I think that Lacan would have loved this anecdote because of the displacement of the signifier. He also said this other sentence sometime after this this incident. I have it here. The patient said, "A contrivance to change the color of a man's eye to please a psychologist is too much. And you are all psychologists, though some of you turn and become medical doctors for that part of you which hurts. Never mind thinking of the man who is so sick he has to munch on his own." So it's again the reference to eating, and Bateson makes also like saying, well, he's talking about changing the color of a man's eye. Look at the slide. He's the eye as the part of the face. Bateson makes it change it the color of a man's eye as a personal pronoun, right? Wanting to change me, who I am as a subject. This is what the institution was doing to him, right? So I thought this was something that comes from a different tradition, but was interesting to illustrate, to start getting the flavor of what the signifier is and what it means for a text to be alive or for language to keep moving. Okay, so good luck and I see you next Saturday.